and like some of the world's best athletes and sports people are from like a multi-sport background, or they maybe done tennis or netball or something.
Good afternoon and welcome to the Reflective Coach podcast with Coach Luca. We're going to kickstart the Coaching Insight series with our first guest, Georgia Smethurst. It was great to speak to Georgia about her experiences from little kickers to what she does at grassroots, coaching female athletes, to what she does as a coach developer with the English FA. She's worked for Carlisle College as a lecturer. She's been a mentor for Cumberland FA and currently the FA in other strands. She's been at Little Kickers. She's coached at Carlisle United FC. She currently coaches a female team. It was great to speak to Georgia about these insights, her experiences, her philosophy, and the way that she has developed her coaching and the differences in coaching various groups. Now, there was a framework for our interview when talking about the coaching insights, but we went off on a tangent and ended up just enjoying a conversation around coaching and what it was. And it's great to have that conversation, the way that coaches develop a conversation as they would in a session, and what changes they would make into that session and as to why. Now, there's so much within this great episode. I'm delighted to welcome Georgia for the first interviewee of the Coaching Insight series as part of the Reflective Coach podcast. I hope you enjoy this episode. If you want to be part of the interviewees, just reach out. But it was a delight to speak to Georgia. You're able to listen to this on Spotify, YouTube, Podcast Addict, and Anchor. You can find the Reflective Coach podcast on Twitter and LinkedIn. I hope you enjoy this episode. This is Coach Luca, the Reflective Coach podcast. This morning, despite having 6 weeks of working in a school, people are still wanting to do things. So it wasn't too bad. It's been quite nice to be out in the good weather and getting kids running and active and smiling. So it's been quite nice of a day so
lovely,
far.
Isn't it?
Yeah, it's stunning.
Yeah.
So when you talk about, it being manic, there's so much going on when it comes to the coaching world.
Yeah.
It's constant, non-stop, trying to fit things in. Everyone's schedules can be quite busy.
Oh yeah, definitely. I think everybody involved in sport, whether it's part-time or full-time, it's particularly around this time of year, it seems to be non-stop.
And, it's good to be non-stop, but sometimes that non-stop right throughout a coaching year can be, so hectic all year round. Just to have that week to switch off, even then you're getting contacted because so many people want things from you.
Yeah. Or even if you're not affiliated with any sort of clubs or any coaches anymore, you still get contacted to help out or to cover somebody or
And that's exactly the same with how I got into coaching this morning. I used to work with the bloke who runs this coaching company, and now he's run it. He seems to have a list of contacts, and I'm one of them. And he knows I work in the school, so I'm free in the holidays. So it's hard to sort of balance and get away from it sometimes.
Yeah, it's a blessing and a curse sometimes, isn't it, when they know you've got the holidays off?
Absolutely. And then suddenly you work for your holidays, and then you're back to full time in September, and you're busy again.
Yeah, no rest for the wicked.
No, absolutely. But it's great that you're on and you've got so much experience. The first question is sort of, how did you start off on your coaching experience? How did you get into it?
It was probably just helping out really with other little bits here and there. I've seen on Twitter, I don't know if you're on Twitter, recently there's been quite a few people posting about there was an FA leadership camp for young people over the last week or so, and I was involved in that sort of thing nearly 10 years ago now. So it was quite nostalgic seeing everybody's posts about it, but that really kick-started my kind of enjoyment and wanting to know more about it. So it was quite nice to see other people still kind of doing that now.
And that's great because, the English FA and what they have in Sport England is quite structured, and there's a lot of pathways which are in place for young people, and a lot of diversity and equality strands are coming through now in terms of getting through, and leadership in women is quite big at the moment, whereas when you switch that here to Wales, there's none of that as such. There's obviously segments of it, but in terms of what the FA offer compared to the FAW, I think the FA gets so many more coaches and so many more young people through so quick and through such a good program, which has led you to do so many amazing things for the FA. I think we miss out on that here in Wales.
Yeah, I think I've seen a couple of times the Welsh FA do like quite a lot of female only specific courses led by female tutors, which I think is really good. Um, there's probably more of that in Wales than there is near where I live, I suppose. Um, but maybe not as much those other strands that you were talking about, like the leadership and things. I'm not as haven't seen as much of that.
And in that sense, I think, the English FA are, the best in Britain in terms of the FA and what they do at the minute. And I think the FAW are just behind because of where they're going and what their vision is for the future, especially by the new CEO who's in place. And then I think it'd probably be the Scottish FA and then the Irish FA. But I think there's a massive contrast of differences between where the Irish FA are at the bottom compared to England. And then even though the Welsh are second, we're still so far away from how good the English FA and what their structure is over in England.
Yeah, and you could say the same for different sporting governing bodies rather than just football as well. They're all very contrasting, aren't they? And either the direction that they want to go um, or actually what they're doing right now.
Absolutely, and when it comes to those national governing bodies, sometimes seems to be a massive program which kickstarts, a long-term project. But when there's a big focus such as mental health, and then BAME, and then LGBTQIA plus, and then women's sports, it's all well and good, having those programs. But when they sort of seem to fizzle out because it's the next trend of program that comes through as such, they sort of become forgot about in a sense because it then becomes a tick box at times sometimes, and then there's not as much focus in those areas, which can be a little bit difficult.
Hmm. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, and in that sense, you started out by Little Kickers. Now, Little Kickers isn't for every coach in the world, but it can be
Yeah,
a great way to start off with.
yeah.
And it's an experience within itself. And, Little Kickers, you can do as young as 18 months. And
It's crazy, isn't it?
absolutely, and
Yeah,
when you do tots and you sat there and they're literally coming close to you, they're dribbling on your hands, and they trying to get them even to focus and do stuff is a complete skill in itself.
yeah, yeah, definitely. I think prior to that, I'd done quite a lot of grassroots volunteering and had teams in that. So, um, Little Kickers was maybe, apart from doing holiday camps, maybe one of my more like initial paid kind of roles, and definitely a shock to the system because you maybe go from the youngest being 6 or 7 on a holiday camp or in grassroots football to 6 or 7 being one of the older stage groups that you're doing.
And in
um,
that sense, when you work with such young players at that age, people are like, how do you even get an 18-month-year-old, to even kick a ball or do what you ask? But when you get a good, cohort and, they're following consistently and you've got that build up, it works quite well over a flow through of time.
yeah, definitely. I think at that age it's probably less about the football and more just about them doing something, having a good time, or it's maybe the first time that 18-month-year-old has socialised with a group of other kids, whether it be like a group of 10 or a little bit smaller. But especially over COVID and recent times, I think somebody doing that sort of role, for all whether people agree with it or not, I think it's um, if you look at it in one perspective, it could be almost like taking them to like a mum and baby class or something, but just a more active one. I think that's maybe how it should be looked at, and not like a I'm taking them to football training. But yeah,
And in that sense, I've done, tots from 18 months. That's how I started out as such. I really enjoyed it. And, I worked on a program for 2.5 years. I had such great parents and it worked well. And I had such a routine and structure with it. And then I progressed on. I've done more grassroots stuff. I've done more professional. I've been in an academy. I've gone on to achieve my B. And when you sort of, raise your bar and then you work with players of high standards in an academy, and then I was brought back in to do some kicks coaching last year for 18 months. You sort of go into that session, you're like, I don't miss doing this at all. There's so much, my head is not in this space anymore.
yeah, you really need to be switched on, don't you? Because you're not looking for how are they passing the ball or anything like that. You're looking like, can you keep them safe? Are they listening? But I think the skills that you develop, especially you if you had done it for that long, is that's like fundamental what you carry through to every other role. Whether it's like maybe not the 18-month-year-old, but the little bit older, maybe like 5, 6, the behaviour management and the your organisation beforehand and looking for little. nooks and crannies on the wall that are sticking out that might hurt somebody, and just those little things that you maybe subconsciously pick up over the time. But what you mentioned about the parents, having really good parents, that's really important for that sort of thing. I think whether you've got like an assistant or parents, particularly at that age, just to really give you a hand and kind of join in to keep it going. Because sometimes it's really difficult.
No,
Probably
absolutely.
it's probably really hard compared to doing um, older age groups. I think everybody should try experience something similar, whether it's as young as 6 or 7. It doesn't have to be really, really young, but
No, of course, and in that sense, when you do have those great parents, when I had those parents, they knew what the expectation was. They knew how to support my session in terms of how I wanted it to flow, when I needed to come in, what the kids sort of needed to do, how I was going to speak to them, and the parents were really supportive, and it worked well. And suddenly that 45-minute session would pass so quickly because you had such great parents. Now I've gone into kicks, and because I've covered a few sessions and I've dropped in, I haven't had that consistency with the parents because I'm just dropping in. But when you sort of deliver a session and then you've got parents over in the corner doing their own thing, not even listening, not even coming in, kicking the ball, and you're like, why are you even paying for this class if you don't want to partake in it?
mm, yeah, I think it's very, very hard to cover. Like you say, it's one of those things. You're not like setting your stall out at the start, but maybe just the expectations of if somebody is wanting to get involved in some aspect, how much of that can they help, and how much when does it become harder to then manage the session if they're joining in as well.
No, absolutely. And then when you do get the parents who sometimes sit on the side, and then you're like, okay, right, I need parents to join in, or I would like them to at least. And then some of them are like, what, really? We have to get involved? Well, what do you want me to have 30, 18-month-year-olds sort of just kicking the ball around to my song,
Yeah,
while you sit there?
yeah, it definitely makes it easier if you've got someone that are more willing.
And in terms of that, it's that expectation which comes into, little kickers and then, kicks and things like that. Because, I was having a conversation with the coaching team at Kicks, and a few inquiries came from parents like, obviously these kids are up to 5 years of age. But a few of the inquiries from the parents were like, well, are they not playing games? This is an academy, isn't it? You're like, well, these kids are 3 or 4. The word academy should even be coming out of your mouth.
Yeah, yeah, that's a UK wide thing, isn't it? Big dreams very early on, I think.
No,
But I suppose
absolutely.
that's like what I said about setting the stall out at the start, them understanding what it is they're actually going to get out of it, and what the purpose of it is. If they come straight away thinking it's going to be academy, and you're saying no, this is really based on like developing their fundamental movements and making them a better all-round person and sports person, then you might lose a few, but at least they know what they're getting.
No, absolutely, and it just kicks into yourself and ourselves. Even in the vision that we might have, long term, starting family and things like that, which might be in the backs of our minds and so far away. But you sort of see it from little kickers into such a young age, then into grassroots again when they're young. That contrast of national governing body where they got those programs, academy football, and you get to see it all over that time. But when you think of when we might have children and our families, you sort of get to develop a pathway of what you want for your child in that sense, where you've seen it all from everyone else, and you're like, right, if I go to little kickers, it's just going to be for fun until they're 7, 8, 9 years of age, and then the academy can kick in when they're in high school, for example.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah, I think um, there's a lot on social media that maybe doesn't help with that sort of thing, giving the opposite messages maybe.
No, of course,
But
and
each to their own, I suppose.
yeah, each to their own. But it can be so difficult when you work with parents, or you have these conversations and they expect so much so soon. And I was speaking to a parent a couple of weeks back who was originally, their child was in my pre-academy. Again, this child is only 9 now, I believe, and he was like, right, he's at so and so club, he's at this club, he's at that club, he does this coaching program, he's out 7 days a week. I was like, he's 9. You are
Hmm.
overcoaching this kid and pushing him in so many directions that you're not even thinking about injury. You're not even thinking about how he's being pulled left, right, and centre. How it's affecting him socially because he's just going to be too much. Have too much focus just being on driven in one area, and he's going to miss out on the other key things such as the enjoyment of playing. And I couldn't comprehend how much push was on this child at 9 for 7 days a week.
Yeah, and like some of the world's best athletes and sports people are from like a multi-sport background, or they maybe done um, tennis or netball or something for years and years and years, and then totally took a different turn, and now they're football or they're athletics or and they're like on the world stage. But that's not somebody that was at a athletics development centre from six. That's someone that was probably racing in the garden and sports day, that kind of thing. Um, but I think there's not a lot of awareness about that sort of thing, which maybe would educate a few more parents in particular. They just think probably the more the better, which, like you said, can be damaging.
Yeah, and it's that balance which needs to be created, and again, that understanding, especially as you talked about there, that multi sports in terms of, that cross curricular. When I've sort of, because I've done so much coaching and I adapt the little things in the, a football session, we might start off with a game of netball. And, a game of netball, throwing, catching, moving, introducing new rules, talking, just even before we do the football aspect and introducing other sports. And some of the parents are going, why are you doing netball? This is a football session, and it's
Yeah,
not comprehending how you're amalgamating all those skills.
yeah. I said I say quite a few times to some of the students that I teach. Um, I went on a like a coach development weekend or week thing. I think it was with the Youth Sport Trust, and there was lots of different sports there. And I feel like from another coach, apart from observing them just in discussion, I feel like I've learnt the most from a swimming coach, which I suppose you could look at that in the sense of me learning from a different sport the same way a player would learn from a different sport. But I think even as a player, because I still play a little bit, nothing really competitive, but kind of growing up as a player, I'd done my refereeing, I got into coaching, done the leadership, and all of that I felt like contributed to how I played better, um, which would equally be the same as tapping into different sports to make you better at that one, I think.
No, of course, and when you go through that personally, you can see that inheritance of what you've learned from those courses as a player yourself, and how it you brought that into your game. When I've just taken over an under 19s team, and a few of our young lads are just doing their referees and they're doing their leaders, and they can see and understand what the coaches and what we're trying to do and how we're trying to get things across, which is they're supportive of that, and they bring that into the change room, and they can bring the squad closer to the coaches and create more of that environment, which is really beneficial.
Yeah, I think it brings a bit more clarity to it, and they can then pass on or like help pass on that message as much as they can because um, you can have knowledge of the game, I think, but unless you understand why the coach is doing what they're doing, it might not translate as effectively.
And when there's sessions which can be delivered as chaos sessions where there's so much going on, there's you're hitting so many areas which you want to get out of it, but because they're not understanding and they're not seeing that sense of what the coach is actually doing, it can be so difficult. And it's about how you get that across over a period of time to your group in that environment and maintain that consistency where they can understand, all right, coach George is doing this or coach Luca's doing this, and we get this and we're completely understanding of it. And it really helps, develop that. So, that consistency for you and us in total is really beneficial.
Yeah, I think it's really important to have a basic, they know what you're doing roughly, why you're doing it, and how you're going to get there, whether that's teaching, coaching, trying to develop a coach. I mean, that won't always work. You'll know that from the younger sessions, but as long as they've got a rough idea, then they can try and see where you're going with it, and that almost helps them learn in itself.
And if they're continuing the learning, that's only going to benefit the whole learning environment and that experience. And especially when new players come in and other coaches, it becomes this whole environment of openness and transparency where everyone can learn and they can all apply and really develop together. And you've done so much around coaching education and coach mentoring and tutoring and lecturing, which is a wide range of skills which can be really beneficial. And you know mentoring coaches can be quite a difficult thing, and developing them in their own sense, because they come in with their own thoughts and their own philosophy, and sometimes they're quite stuck in their ways, and trying to get them to adapt. How easy is it to get a coach to adapt, or can it be quite challenging?
Um, it's difficult because if you're going into their environment, that's exactly what it is. they know their environment a lot more than you. So you could be looking at it thinking, what is going on? But really, if you got to know their players as much as they did, there might be a perfectly reasonable justification as to why they've decided to do it like this, or why it looks like absolute chaos at the start and then starts to fizzle. Or um, yeah, it's difficult really because you don't want to change the way someone does it because there's no real right way. The way I do it, someone might look at it and think that's absolutely horrific. Why is she doing it that way? Um, I think it's all about knowing the group that you're working with, and what's right for one might not be right for the next. I think if you do end up working with another coach and you see them across different environments, that'd be the most um, like insightful to see them properly as a coach, as opposed to just seeing them with one team once a week for an hour, where you just see them in one way really. Like if they're putting on a show to the under nines, that's all you're seeing. But if you then put them in front of an under 19s, Um, are they exactly the same? Are they different? Are they more technical? Do they give more or less information? Um, if they can adapt that way, then there's no real need to change what they're doing. But you're not trying to change. You're probably guiding them. Um, but it's just whatever suits them best. If you're looking at it and thinking they're really struggling to take on all this information that they're giving, it's just dripping in. And like I said, what might you do differently? How might you go about it? A couple of ideas why that might be beneficial, that what, how, why, as long as they can grasp it. Because if they think what you're saying is a load of rubbish, then they're not going to try it anyway, or they might try it for the 10 minutes that you're there and then never look at it again.
And again, you hit on a really good point. It's about knowing your players and what works for them. And it can be
Yeah.
so difficult to apply the same, coaching process right across, across the board in terms of, right, if you've got 10 coaches coaching the same group of players, it's not all going to work for those players because it's not that understanding of what works for them, in that sense of that structure all the time. And there's so many different needs in that session. It's how you adapt and how you support each and every one of your players and hit those needs, so they can get out of it. So, I've done coaching courses and, like my B, you get assessed on a certain criteria and it can be so difficult because you're like, right, I could go away and I can coach an academy for a year and I can better myself as a coach. But realistically, on this course, I'm ticking these boxes, but necessarily all my sessions throughout the year aren't going to flow how these boxes need me to flow. And it can be quite difficult at times because that's how you perceive the scene and be expected to coach, but how you actually coach can be so different.
Yeah, I think it's difficult. It's better that it's a lot more of a holistic approach and it's more of like a competency thing now, and you might hit certain criterias or achieve certain paths as you're going along, which is important because when it was the previous way of you've got this one session at all, your whole year lies on this one session, same like the old level two and the level one, um, the pressure that's on that, but also now you're working in your own environment, so although you might not work towards what would be some of the criteria, you're trying to apply it in your environment as opposed to if you're working with under 13 boys and then you're then going to be working with 30, 40-year-old men on your session. It's not realistic. So even if you hit the criteria but you're doing it with those men, is that beneficial to you? Probably not, because it's not translatable to the environment that you're in. um yeah, I think it's definitely better than what it was, but it at times it is quite hard to pass it across. I know when I done mine, I done it with, or I started it with under 14 girls. So it's very tactical, isn't it, as opposed to technical. You need to get the technical in there, but when I was trying to coach them, some of the technical aspects weren't there for some of the newer ones. So I was finding myself having to stop it, apply some technical, almost miss a tactical element because I needed the technical first. You need to know how to do it before you can then impact the rest of the team. Um, that was definitely a challenge. Um, mm.
You know, it's a lot of people can be like, right, this session might not work because you're focusing exactly on technical because you might do something basic, such as passing, and then you might focus an entire hour on passing because they need to get the technical outcomes because they haven't got that, and just having that hour away from everything else and just being able to focus on that can really benefit some players because they lack that opportunity, especially where games come and they get limited time on the ball and limited minutes, and they might not enjoy the game as much. How much are they developing in terms of that passing? But when you focus on that technical session, it can be really beneficial. But then you might have other coaches look at it from the outside and go, well, they could get that by doing this and that, and but sometimes you need to strip back to the basics and
Yeah,
go, well, we need that technical session.
yeah. I think I can't remember where I was, but there was a group of coaches and we were talking about how often do you use game-based practice and how often do you use like the old technique, skill, small-sided game, that kind of thing. And there was a bit of an argument for and against both, and people said, well, if you're working with a group that are younger, obviously you need to teach them some sort of a technique so they can apply it to the game, which totally makes sense. But then they need to play the game because that's the game that they play on the weekend, which again makes sense. Um, but I think for coaches working with players that see them multiple times a week, there's definitely a time and a place for both. Um, you don't want to be overworking them constantly in games-based practices 3, 4 nights a week. At times, it is appropriate to have um, more technical, um, not as much a slower pace, but less load on the player, which is really important. But again, that's only if you're really working at a higher end, I suppose.
And it's about having that balance because as much as technical, is really important. I had a boy come in from a coaching centre as part of my grassroots team, and you could see how technically coached he was, because the way he kicked the ball, the way he come around, he'd step off and then run up to try and kick it. He'd always try and awkwardly come around the ball, and you'd be like, right, we need to sort of apply this, but undo everything that they've done. Although you've hit the really good technical points, because you're so technical, you've become awkward in a sense in terms of how you've adapted into a small-sided game. You're not comfortable on the board to make that pass or to get into that position or open up your body, and feel more comfortable. So we sort of had to undo some of the technical aspects that they have applied because he's obviously gone to a coaching session and centre, and they've been right. We need to focus on this, and they've overly focused on it. And it was detrimental to him because he's further behind the boys which have been part of our grassroots for a period of time, and we've seen a massive increase in progress over that year since he was able to apply himself into a team in those game situations. So that balance is really important as you speak about.
And like we said earlier about knowing the player, some of them, particularly young boys and growing to be young girls as well, absolutely love it, don't they? And you might do 5 or 10 minutes at the start, which is a lot more of a blocked practice or like a fixed type passing technical drill, and then go into more of a game based stuff. But they might play on their own at home with a wall, and they might be doing that for the next 7 hours before you see them again. So it might be that if you know your players are out playing on a night doing that sort of thing, then as long as you show them in small sections roughly how to have a go at it, it might be that they're not, and that's the only opportunity that they get to play. I know things are very different now to maybe when we were growing up, but there is still a lot that go out every night and practice.
And it's those who go out and practice, they might sort of understand games such as World Cup, keeper, knockouts, things like that, which a lot of players aren't sort of getting to understand these days. Because I've ended up going right, we're going into World Cup now with an under 10s group, and some of them are going, what's that? Whereas like the ones off the street are like, come on now,
Yeah,
this
that
is
was
how
the
it
bread and
works.
butter.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, and that's the way it is. And I remember doing starting off in the 19s, and we were only like 3 weeks in. And I said, right, boys, we're getting straight into a World Cup knockouts now. And they absolutely buzzed and thrived off it for 16, 17, 18, 19-year-olds. And they were like, what, really? And they were like enjoying the session. They were getting into little teams. They had so much fun off it. And I was like, right, sometimes that session's needed. And we need to
yeah.
get away from all these, so technical based sessions and all this information, how we layer it and get it in, and just sometimes remember they just want to have a bit of fun whilst they're playing football.
And I think that's what's missing, especially at that age group. Like you see, was it last year or the year before? There was videos of like England men's team throwing around at like a rubber chicken, and like that's men in the 20s, 30s, um, having a laugh, and why that doesn't transcend down to under 19s, under 20s local football who think that it's maybe win at all costs in some aspects. You need to have fun to enjoy it, and if you're not enjoying it, then you're gonna drop out. And if you live quite rurally, like I do, teams are maybe few and far between to come by as it is. So you don't want people to be dropping out. You want them to be enjoying it, and that's why people turn up fundamentally at the bottom of the game.
It's that enjoyment we speak about. And, I speak to some of my coaches and I'm like, well, I stopped playing at 16 because I hated senior football. It just wasn't for me. It was this environment where everything was like, results and running and, swearing and everything that comes with it. I was like, that wasn't for me as a 16-year-old. I hadn't been used to it and, jumping straight into seniors and being in that environment, I just didn't enjoy it. And that's how I ended up spending more time coaching. And now I'm able to understand what these 19s are going through and how they need to sort of adapt and become a bit more resilient to some aspects of it, such as being in the game situation, but also in a sense of understanding them that going into seniors isn't always for all of them, and it is quite difficult because the seniors coaches are like, right, we want them training with us, they need to be training, and then we're going down to watch them at seniors, and seniors are just blast running them for an hour and a half. You're like, why? As much as I understand getting fitness in, realistically they're doing an hour and a half here, then they might play one game, might get one more session in, but say less 4 hours over a week, you know, over a week, considering what they're eating, what their lifestyle is, you're not making a massive contribution on that fitness. So that hour and a half of them, they've been like, all right, we've just been blasted for an hour and a half. We're knackered. I don't want to go back to seniors. All the older boys have just bollocked me for making a mistake, and they're just having a go. And you can feel so sorry for them at times for having to be in that situation.
Yeah, it's really difficult. I think that transition from a junior to a senior team on male and female football, it's a big jump, isn't it? Very different as well, in terms of the environment, which I don't think it necessarily has to be at times.
No, and again, it comes back down to knowing your players and knowing what works for them. And I know a couple of players who have said, right, if I knew it was running, I wouldn't have come this week. And you can completely understand why, because there's no chance I would want to get involved in a running session.
Yeah, yeah, I know. And like you said, out of the whole week, if you've got potentially 3, 4 hours worth of what's meant to be football time, and you are doing it, just doing shuttles up and down for 3 hours of that, how beneficial is that actually going to be?
No, of course. And I remember when I was a 16-year-old, the team had folded, and then I went to join another team which my mate played for, and we were just running for an hour, and then the coach was like, right, I got 42 boys signing on. You're not all going to be picked week in, week out, but I expect you training. I was like, so what? I'm just going to be running back and forth every week, not to get picked, not to be played, waiting my turn. I was like, nah, this is not for me, and I didn't turn up again. And then that's when I tried seniors football, and then I was like, right, no, maybe this is the end for me. But I didn't enjoy it. And now I apply it into what I do as a coach and try to understand those players. And understanding your players is important. And obviously, coaching boys and girls can be so different. Like I've coached boys and I've coached girls, and I've enjoyed both. But away from it, I think I've enjoyed coaching girls more than I've ever coached boys.
Do you know, I've heard that quite a few times, um, from men in particular, and I think it's the same sport. It's just a different way of um, well, not a different way of engaging. It's just a different type of player. I suppose you could get a boys' team which is very similar socially to a girls' team, but then you might not. Um, yeah, it's just understanding it a little bit differently. I know there's a guy that I've coached with who said he found that the boys' team wanted to play more games and more game-based stuff, and the girls' teams wanted to talk about things, talk about the technique and how do you actually do that and why do I do it and in what situation might that happen, and that leads you to kind of build your practice from there. And he said he found that really enjoyable and developed him as a coach because it was him really laying down exactly this is what you need to do in this situation when you're trying to play out from the back. This is why you need to run there and what where you need to run, that kind of thing. Whereas the boys one, it was maybe a little bit more. They were more frustrated if you wanted to stop and talk about anything like that. But you do want to feel like you're coaching at times, obviously, but you don't want to be stop starting all the time.
Yeah, and too much stop start can be frustrating for anyone. Even
Yeah,
I've watched coaching sessions, on delivery, like on my B, and I've watched other coaches, and how many times the instructors have had to stop the same group because they've been used all day, and you can just see the frustration on the players once they get stopped again, and their heads are up and they're like, oh, what again? And it can be like, right, especially difficult for them on a coaching course because they've been there all day, they've just had information in their ear all day long, and too much of it can be frustrating. Um,
yeah,
and it's great coaching girls because they just want to soak everything up all the time. Whereas boys, I find it so I've become more apparent to it is because they're not listening half the time anymore.
mm,
And it can be
yeah,
so hard to get them back round and get them wired in. And again, it's, can we adapt the session where they're going to be wired in? And this is exactly what they want to do, which can be completely important because I plan sessions and I've had such a detailed session planned in. And then suddenly they've turned up 10 minutes in, I've looked at the warm up and then I've gone, right, we're going to go into this technical aspect now. But I'm stood there on the side observing and be like, right, we're going to completely drop the rest of this session, flip it on its head and then get going with, just games and have the fun for an hour.
yeah. And that could even be something to do with the day they've had, or the day of the week that your session's on, and when their games are, or what they've had at school. Or I remember one session years ago, the what was I doing? It was something to do with pressing, um, or like how to press, the direction of the run, and that kind of thing, and how one play leads another. I remember being infuriated in my head because I couldn't decide. I couldn't work out why it was so slow and lethargic, and then I worked out it was they stood having a drink. I was chatting to them, and I worked out it was like the county schools cross country event, and that was 3 till 5 or something, and my session was 6 till 7. I thought, right, less of that. We'll just go into put less load on them, more games, more social, because it was clear that that's all they wanted to talk about, how they all done, and they were all knackered, and that really impacts your session. But like we said at the very start, that goes back to just knowing the players, and that was maybe wrong on my behalf when they turned up. I wasn't chatting to them as much. I was more setting up the session and straight into it. Whereas if I had spoke to them at the start, then I'd know, right, okay, I need to strip this right back.
And it's, that sense of some people might say, or some of the coaches might say, making those adaptations while you're in a session can be such a weak thing. And I remember being on my coaching course and then one of the feedback across the board was, don't be afraid to, drag out the size of your pitch whilst you're in the session or
Yeah,
change it. And over this year, I found reflecting back, I found myself doing so much more of that and making those changes as I'm in a session more than I've ever done this year because I'm in the middle of the session and I'm like, right, this is not working or I want to change this because it's not how I planned it or they're not achieving as much as expected because I've over anticipated the quality levels, and I started working for a private coaching company and I don't know the groups and the changes weekly with the groups and what you're leading on, and you might overplan and you're like, oh, right, this group isn't able for that, and there's nothing wrong with being in the middle of that session and making those changes or stripping right back as you say.
no, definitely just go with where they are. I know even last week, I covered 2 sessions for the team I play in, which is always very difficult to coach your teammates. But throughout, I was like, right, is this too big? Is it too small? Do you want to change it? Should we add another defender in there? Um, because that can you want them to enjoy it, but you want to get everyone to get the most out of it that you can. So if halfway through your like first activity, they're thinking, God, this is too tight. They might be thinking that because it's meant to feel too tight, but they might be thinking that because it's actually ruining what you're trying to get out. Um, yes, it's funny you said that because I felt like just last week.
And on that basis, then, when you sort of go into a session or you think about your sessions across the board, if we get to see, quite a lot of clubs appointing technical or specialist set piece coaches now, and some people are going, "What even is a set piece specialist?" But you can sort of understand it from a coaching perspective. If you might have a coach who comes in and does all the technical with the players, and then you also have your fitness coaches and so on, which are all tailored. But sometimes as a coach, we have to adapt to the 4 pillars and get every one of those pillars out. Now, sometimes I find myself what I would call myself a psychology coach, because I spend so much time thinking about the players whilst I'm there and trying to get into their heads and get them thinking and problem solving so much, whilst they're doing the technical, but I'm more focused on right, we've got the technical, but how much psychology can I get out of them now? And that's my mindset. Whereas other coaches go, right, they're doing this thinking side, but I want to get more technical on this side. So, I would call myself a psychology coach. And I was talking to my friend who's just finished his PhD, and he was saying he reckons there's going to be more of those coaches involved in the game in 10 years.
Yeah.
So, in that sense, when it comes down to it, how would you perceive yourself as a coach in terms of those four pillars?
Um, I think it'd be really nice, in these like higher clubs in the adult pro setups, and they've got pretty much somebody that covers each pillar, and that's really effective. Like your friend said, that's probably going to be a lot more apparent as it goes on. But that's really effective as long as everybody's kind of talking together and singing off the same hymn sheet. A bit like what we said at the very start, kind of setting the expectations of the standards down, particularly at the pro level. Um, I think it really depends what group I'm working with. I've done, like you said at the start, really young kids, grassroots, disability, turn up and play. Grassroots adults, what are they there for? That's important to know. Do they want to try win the league? Or do they all want game time and have a social and have a laugh and go to the pub afterwards? Um, I've worked on like the performance pathway with development centres, advanced coaching centres. What are they there for, and what do they actually want out of it? Are they bothered about making friends with the people that they're with, or is it more important to them to be a lot better at technically or tactically or psychologically? So I think it really just depends. I know at one point, um, I had a grassroots team. I was working in advanced coaching centre, um, and then my day job before I was a lecturer, I was going into secondary schools and trying to get girls into football. So it was like I had lots of different hats. So in the afternoon, I'd be like social, really fun. Right, come on, let's go. Team games, captains. Um, then it'd get later on, and I might have a grassroots team. But in the grassroots team, you might have somebody that's just joined from one of those school sessions that's been really fun. But you might also have somebody that's playing in the advanced coaching centre. So you've got somebody in the team that's really technical, and that's exactly what they want because they want to get better, and someone that's joined because they absolutely love football now. They're just not quite, they're not ready for the technical as much as the advanced coaching centre player, but they're there for the love of it, and it's trying to find a balance in that one. So I think grassroots coaching for that reason, particularly in girls, where you can play across lots of different domains at once, is really difficult. But then when you're in the more performance domain and maybe more technical, tactical, depending on the age group, I really liked doing sort of the under 12s a couple of years ago, and that was a very technical kind of age group. But I think more now I'm swaying towards tactical now. I want to do more 11-a-side stuff. So it's been nice to kind of put on each hat. But I think there's a different hat for different sessions and different reasons, and knowing that's important, I think.
Of course, and sometimes you can forget that that hat is on, because I've had a grassroots team and I spent 8 years with them, and I enjoyed being with them so much on a Saturday morning and just being part of that family environment which we created, and having that togetherness and understanding. And then I was coaching in an academy, and an academy football can be such a different environment. It can be so intense. I always found the academy intense as soon as you walked in, and the expectations of even the players alone, especially at under nines, tens, 11s, from that young to have that expectation, and at times that ego and arrogance which they carry because they're academy players and they've signed a contract, it can be so difficult.
Yeah,
And it's how they comprehend it. And you're like, right, just because you're on contract, don't forget that can always finish, or your outcomes might be different at the end of the year. But sometimes you forget you wear that hat. And I would go on a Saturday morning with my grassroots team and I do a session, and I'd be so frustrated sometimes because I was like, right, I expect the highest performance from you now. I want this achieved. And then sometimes I'm like, well, I haven't got my academy hat on this morning. Let's
yeah,
just tail
they're here
back.
for the fun, or yeah,
Yeah, and it's hard because you've got some of those players, because they're in the shadow squad, which is under the academy. They automatically adjust to you, and they expect those standards. And then when some of the other players aren't fitting into that framework, it can be difficult for them to, as teammates, to understand why aren't you doing what the coach is asking. And then sometimes you're not enjoying the grassroots because you're like, right, they're not achieving the standards in the academy. That I see this, they're passing the ball first time, they're quick, they're fast. And then sometimes you're in the academy, you're like, right, this is too intense. I just want to go back and have a bit of fun with my Saturday team, and it can be hard, and you want to balance that at times as a coach.
Yeah, really difficult to balance it. Um, because you don't want to create a divide in the team either of we're the good players, we get the technical, like we already understand the technical, you need your hand held. It shouldn't be like that. So it's really difficult for anybody to try and manage that. But I suppose you get that at any team, not necessarily if you have got any academy players or anything like that. You might just have people that are very, very good and people that just love turning up that maybe aren't as technically able, but they turn up for different reasons. And as long as you can kind of balance that and manage the environment with everybody, might need quite a few individual conversations to try and manage that. But yeah, I know when I had the school stuff going on and the grassroots, and then the same people sometimes playing at the advanced coaching centre, um, I know they noticed a difference in me. So we were at the school stuff, and I just wanted people to love playing or get involved as a coach, a referee, a player, anything. Um, so I'm dead enthusiastic, like love and life, massive character, not worrying about, maybe drop a tiny bit in, try not to kick it with your big toe, and then a joke after it. But if that was at the other end of the spectrum, it's a lot different, isn't it? And talking to individuals to make sure that they understand that you've got to be different in different situations, and sometimes you need to turn it on, and other times you need to rein it in the same way a player does. Sometimes being honest with them and talking about that's quite important. In my masters, we've done a bit of work on like the facade that you put on, so the front that you're showing to people, and that's really stuck with me, especially with that transition throughout each one, because it was a front that you're putting on. Because I'm quite social as a person, but not quite at the level I was giving off in that session, and maybe the academy ones I was less social than I am as a person, and holding it back and putting on different hats or masks or whatever you'd refer to it as.
It's that facade, that face that can be put on, because I remember when I first started out in the academy, I started out as a development centre coach, and then you obviously start off with your C license, and you seem quite low, and you have not that much experience when I first started out, and you get in a development centre to try and kickstart that experience. And I
Yeah,
remember going away to the academy, and we were playing the academy team, and the academy team, even though we were part of the same academy, did not care about the development centre at all, because they were the academy. They were the ones that had to win that game, even though it was a training exercise. And even the
mm.
coaches, who were supposed to be your colleagues, would look down on you because you were the development centre coach. And I just, it can be. I remember being in that situation, and it was so difficult, because I was like, why do you have this such arrogance just because you got this label of academy coach? And why do you walk around with this swagger? And I can completely understand, sometimes you've worked so hard, you've got there, and you've got a good team, but I was like, but we're the same coaches of the same nature for the same purpose.
And I think at times it's difficult because your job in one respect might be harder as a development centre coach because you're trying to manage someone whose ego might be growing, but technically they're not quite, it's not in line with where their ego should be. Um, Whereas their job might be easier in that respect but harder in another. And it's the same when if you were to turn up and um, you were all sort of UFC level two coaches, and you immediately get given the under sixes or the under fives or something, and oh, it's the easy job, you just tie in laces, that kind of thing. When really the behaviour management, the having to adapt constantly, maybe larger numbers, all of that needs to be taken into account, and at times is a harder job than having under 16s, under 18s, or higher level players.
No, it can be hard. And, I remember I progressed to academy coach over that time. And one of the development centre coaches stayed as development centre because he didn't want to do academy football. And then our new academy manager introduced an internal games program where the academy would regularly play the shadow squad in the development centre. And one of the academy coaches long term who had been there was up against this long term development centre coach. And they had a game, and the development team lost like by 40 goals to the academy. And I remember them clashing on a pitch and arguing in front of all the parents, even though they're the same club in the same academy, because development centre coach was like, why did you have to do that? We could have switched teams, we could have mixed them up, we could have changed it, we
Yeah.
could have adapted it. What have these development centre players learned? And he was literally stood there defending them in front of this academy coach, and it's like, that shouldn't have to happen.
Yeah, it's the same at grassroots and things, isn't it? When you see 20-0 score lines and you think, how does it get to that stage? I remember having in a grassroots team. I think it was under 12s or under 14s or something. And there was a girl who just moved to my team. Her dad used to have a team, and we played against the team, and we were already sort of 3 or 4 up in the first 10 minutes. And there was still quite a while to go, and we moved all the players round. And I said, right, that you can only score with a volley, you can only score from a cross or something. And she didn't understand when she came off as a sub why we were doing that. And she was like, should I not just kick it into our own net? And I was like, well, how does that make? I mean, that's great for them because they get a goal, but not great for the confidence. You don't develop in any way. And she couldn't understand why you'd maybe do that to kind of progress the players, but also save the other team at the same time. And I think some coaches are there as well, and they think it looks better, but especially when you play in a development centre or a shadow squad, when you're an academy team or a first team, it's you need to see that as like a development opportunity, not a let's smash them opportunity.
No, absolutely, and it didn't create much confidence for the development centre players, nor did it help the relationships internally right across that period. And I remember it wasn't a great weekend all round, in that sense. And when it comes to coaching yourself and being in that situation, or delivery, as a whole, even if not in that situation, what values do you instill as a coach when you go into your sessions?
I think regardless, this has become more clear the longer I've done it, but regardless of what the group is, whether it's performance domain, grassroots, turn up and play, whatever, um, I don't want you to be an idiot. I don't want you to undermine someone else. Don't want you to, respect everybody. I want you to be a decent person before you go in with anything else. Beyond that, I think who was it talking about? I can't remember what context it was in, but somebody had asked me what I thought about somebody else, another player, and I said, "Oh, they're really nice, really coachable." I didn't really think about it until afterwards, and I thought, how important is that coachable aspect? But if you can teach somebody to have good values to then be coachable, they're the players that you see later on down the line that are still really developing at 20, 25. Um, because even though they think that they kind of know it, they understand that someone else might bring something else to the table that they don't quite know yet. Um, so be a decent person, respectful, coachable, confident, um, aggressive at times. I think that's something that's really missing from lower down in the female game. Um, Maybe like a lack of aggression, but that's starting to come out now from the top down, I suppose, which is good to see. It brings it more on par with the physical element.
And, it's those key values which you've carried through, and they might develop over a period of time. And you might have values which you might drop over, that period because you've inherited new ones or you've adapted them in different ways.
Yeah,
And how you might start off as a coach is different how you are 10 years down the line. Because I know when I first started, I thought I knew it all, and I remember taking my grassroots team to play Swansea City in an academy game, and I thought I could walk in, impress them, and they were going to offer me the job by the time I left. But when I've reflected, and even though I've been in the academy and I've looked back, I was like, what was I even thinking, in that sense, because I thought I knew it all. But there's so much adaptation and so much learning to be had as a coach all the time.
I remember I listened to a podcast, and I think it was I don't know whose podcast it was, but I think Ben Bartlett was on it, and he said something about values and about um, lots of people. This was around when the philosophy was a big thing, and it was like lots of people have them, but is it actually in the sessions? And it really made me step back and think, if I'm wanting players to be confident and aggressive and but like respect each other and challenge each other, how am I putting that in to my sessions? Um, and it's something that's really something to come back to. When you've planned a session and you're like, right, I'm wanting to get this out of it, but also like the values at the back of it. I want this to happen and that to happen and that throughout the season. And how is that coming out now? And it's only until the role I've got now, when I've had players that have been at those school sessions and in my grassroots teams, and then at the advanced coaching centres, and now I'm teaching them, or they're coming to their end and they're going on to different things, and you can see like you were maybe a tiny part in what was there, like growing up, and has those values you've put in, them trying to be a good person or empathize with others, does that come out, and do you see it? And at times you do, and that's quite rewarding.
And it's great to have those rewards as a coach, and certainly for your players. And when you get given feedback, which is from other coaches or outsiders, and it's everything that you'd expect and would like as a coach. It's great that it fills you with pride and that confidence of, do you know what? Everything that I've given up all the time has actually been worth it to this point. Because sometimes you can walk away from a coaching session and be like, do you know what? I hated every minute of that session. I couldn't wait for it to be over.
Yeah, absolute car crash.
Yeah, and
And it happens all the time, and I think people are worried about admitting that you will have sessions that are absolutely horrendous, and you just got to get on with it and try and make the best of what you can.
And
Um,
not every session is going to be perfect because you think over a year you could deliver like 100 sessions. How many of them are actually going to be extremely good, and can you maintain the standard all the time? The answer
yeah,
is no, because there's so many different factors. It could be weather, could be that tiredness which they had, it could be your fatigue, it could be lack of equipment, and the session isn't going to be perfect because you might have had to have adapt under the worst circumstances, and automatically that session isn't the greatest because you haven't been able to get all your delivery outcomes in.
yeah,
But sometimes you could just find a session and be like, you know what, I haven't enjoyed even coaching that session. You can't wait to get away from it.
yeah. There could be you could plan and plan and plan, but there could be a million external factors that you just can't control. Last week, like I said, I covered 2 sessions, and we have a bit of a poll to say, right, who can come, who can't come. Make sure you tick it off. So Tuesday night, really well. Planned loads of it, got loads in. Thursday night came, everybody's replied, yeah, it was all going well, but we had 2 new people turn up, and then 3 people were 10 minutes late. And then how do you manage? You're trying to do like a technical, tactical type thing, but the player that you expected to come didn't arrive, or someone's stuck in traffic, and it mainly focuses around their position, and that's what you're working your session around. And how do you deal with that? And it does turn into a bit of chaos, but you've just got to kind of make the best of it, really.
And it's how you deal with those things because sometimes all those factors could play in, and your mind gets thrown off immediately, and then you can be all over the place sometimes because you're
Yeah,
like, oh, how do I do? But
panic.
yeah, and sometimes you just got to take it in your stride and be like, do you know what? Just carry on, or I'm just gonna
Yeah,
make that slight little tweak as we said, and then your session can play out the way that you'd like it to, or at times even better than you'd planned it to be.
yeah, just relax and step back a little bit. Give yourself a minute. I think a lot of people think, oh, it looks like it's starting to die off a bit. I need to change it right now. It might not. You might just need to say something, and then you could leave it for another 2 or 3 minutes, and then come back and make a better change.
Of course, and sometimes, as you say, it's that detailed planning and going into so much information. You could plan and plan and plan, but sometimes just having a 5 minute session plan of right warm up, transition then into a technical, then we're going to go into an SSG, then we might have a cool down. Already, you've planned an hour session there, and then you could layer in everything else so easily whilst you're in that session because you can pick up on it. Sometimes having 5 minute session plans compared to sitting there for an hour can really complement and benefit you.
Yeah, yeah. I think just having a bit of an experience that you've done lots of sessions before, so you know if you add this sort of thing in, or if you take this out, or if you change this here or there, roughly what kind of outcome you'll get. You could start with a practice on paper that looks boring and really basic, and I dread sending sessions to people because they might look at it and think, God, is she actually doing anything there? But then when it comes to it, you actually haven't looked at your session plan in your pocket because you've started with it and you've took it in a different direction, or you've added to it in ways that you hadn't thought of until you were on the way there in the car.
And having that session plan in your pocket, I remember when I first started out as a coach, the mentor that I had 20 years behind him, he said he always still keeps his coaching plans in his pocket just in case. And I know that I've done it last week. I took one in with me, and I very rarely have I ever done it. But I've only just recently started to do it. But even though it's there, it's just there for reflection. But I never actually used it because I'd known my session inside out of what I wanted to do. It just sometimes, it might become a contingency to have it there just in case your session is awful, or you're thinking about so much at one time. Just having that paper and go and looking at it and reflecting on it sometimes can just calm you down, which is a good need for each coach.
Yeah, I know Thursday, like I said, it didn't go as well as I thought. We were doing playing off a front three, like support play from the centre midfield from a front three. And on the paper, I had a little drawing of what I like the drawings on mine. I'm one of those coaches, less writing, more drawings. Um, and on the paper, I had what if 12 turn up, 13, 15, 18. what if one extra turns up? Like, what players can you put where? So immediately they're doing the warm up. I'm looking and counting. And I'm like, right, I've got 16. Right, okay, look for 16. Right, I can add in players here and here, and that won't damage it too much. I can just add in this bit, and it might just be that sort of thing that you have. I know on Tuesday that a boy came down that I didn't expect, and um, he's starting his coaching courses and he's starting a degree, a coaching degree in September, and he wanted to just watch other people's sessions. And I said, "Oh well, we're at this bit. Have a look." And he said he's never seen a session plan before, and that was one that I just hashed together on a bit of paper, but it had elements in it that might be good to look at. And he said that it was beneficial to see and look along. And I was like, well, yeah, you can look along because I've looked at it so many times when I've been planning it that I know where I'm at now. So just you keep an eye on it.
Of course, and we planned in an hour, and I don't want to keep up too much of your time because I know how busy you are. But if there's one thing that you've carried from the start of your coaching career to where you are now, what is it?
Um, don't rush and um try to learn from everybody. So you could go and like you've done your really young kids coaching now, and then you've gone to your under 19s, but it doesn't mean to say that someone now coaching those really young kids knows absolutely nothing. They might know more than you, or they might do something differently, and you might think, "Oh God, that's a great idea." Um, like I'll go to sessions all the time, or even as a player, and something will happen, and I'll think, "Right, you could add that bit there." Um, and then they won't, and they'll take it in a different direction. I'll think, but then the way it plays out, you're like, actually, that's better than what Ada went with. So you can learn from everybody, and I think some people maybe get a little bit um, forget that, and they just go with, oh, I've got to this level, I've achieved this now. I'll learn nothing from that under fives coach, under sixes coach. But really, you might learn a hell of a lot.
No, of course, and it's been great to absolutely speak to you. I think we haven't even scraped the barrel because you've got so much there which we offer, and even though I sent you some questions and a bit of a layout, we haven't even covered half of them because we just got so engrossed in a conversation, and it's been nice to have that natural progression and just speak and go off in those different angles. So I'm really grateful of your time, and I know that you wanted to be prepared, and sometimes delving into little pockets can be off-putting and sort of be like, oh right, I didn't plan for this, but shown great adaptation as a coach there, and
Yeah,
but
just like a session.
exactly. But no, it's been great to speak to you, and we definitely have to do this again, when it fits into your schedule, because I think there's so much more there. But it was great to meet you and great to have you on, and I think you're doing fantastic things. But I'm really grateful of your time.
No, thank you. It's been great being on.
I'm really glad, and again, when you can fit it in, it'd be great to get a couple more in.
Yeah, definitely. No problem.
Brilliant. Well, have a
No.
great day, and thank you again.
Yeah, you as well.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
See you
See you
later.
later.